I am the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for our South Orange Maplewood School District. Welcome all to our evening. So I would like to first start off by thanking our Parenting Center and our elementary school PTAs for our incredible support, crisis support speaker series. Last night was our first night, and now we're on to our second night, focusing on academic support in remote learning. So thank you very much, Parenting Center and elementary school PTAs. You have always come through for us, and we're so excited for this series that you're bringing us now. So I wanted to introduce to you our speaker for tonight, Dr. Monica Gant. She serves as the Associate Secretary of the Delaware Department of Education's Academic Support Team. It's also known as the Chief Academic Officer. Dr. Gant is directly responsible for many of Delaware's most critical academic efforts, including increasing rigor of coursework and learning statewide for all learners, overseeing student assessment system, and the implementation of Every Student Succeed Act. She is committed to equitable access to opportunities for all. She supports the vision of every learner ready for success. Prior to this role, Dr. Gant held several district-level positions in Clark County School District in Athens, Georgia, including Executive Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning, and most recently, Associate Superintendent of Instructional Services and School Performance. After teaching 10 years and serving as a building principal for 16 years in the Columbus City School District in Columbus, Ohio, Dr. Gant served as a school transformation coach with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, providing coaching, mentoring, technical assistance, and on-site supports for schools and school principals and district leaders. So we are extremely excited to have Dr. Gant here today to talk to us about academics and virtual learning. We are all going through something we never thought we would go through, and we can always learn more and more about how to make this situation better. So we're very excited to have Dr. Gant here. I will be handing it over to Dr. Gant very soon. She will give us a presentation, and then we will have the opportunity to ask her some questions. So I do have just a few ground rules to state, and the first one is we ask you to stay muted throughout the evening. And then number two would be when Dr. Gant takes her questions, or actually when you have your question, please put it in the chat, and I will read them to Dr. Gant so that she doesn't have to go searching through the chat. And I just want you to remind you that Dr. Gant will not be answering district-specific questions. She's really looking at this situation from a broad perspective and not just about the South Orange Maplewood School District. But I do encourage you, if you have anything that's very specific to our district, that you reach out to your child's teacher, to the principals, and to anyone in central office, and we will definitely help you get those questions answered. Okay, so without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Monica Gant.
And thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I want to start with a thank you to all of you. So let's see if I can get my computer moving here. So thank you to all of you. You are your child's first teacher. You are the teacher's best resource. Parents, teachers, schools, districts must continue to work together to benefit your child's educational success. But thank you for all that you have done and all that you will do this school year. So that's how I'd like to begin. During this unprecedented time, I've not only had an opportunity to work with Opportunity Labs to develop our state's reopening plan in the wake of the pandemic, but I've had an opportunity to engage with states across the country to learn from and share best practices in national organizations, such as CCSSO, which is Council of City Chiefs State Schools Officers, as well as the SREB, which is the Southern Regional Education Board, Student Achievement Partners. And I'm going to be referencing some work from TNTP this evening because they really focused a lot on equity in academics, especially in times like this. So my goal this evening is to honor your efforts and to empower you through affirmation and with information. I will inject a little humor, which is not meant to minimize your experiences, but to let you know that there are some things that you are experiencing that others are experiencing as well. You are not alone. And so as I talk to other states and I talk to organizations, we're all kind of grappling with what we're experiencing now. And so a part of this evening is really to let you know that you are not alone. So with that, with that, I guess McAfee wants to update something here. So let's see, skip. There we go. So our guiding questions for today's session. We're really going to focus on what is the parent's role in a remote learning environment so that we can help you manage your expectations. What is the school's role in a remote learning environment? And then how should parents prepare to begin the school year in a remote learning environment? To help you manage your expectations from me, I will focus on these questions. And I'm really appreciative to everyone that participated in the survey, because that was a way for me to better understand the things that you are thinking about and trying to work through. As Anne shared, what I can't do, what I won't be able to do is to respond to questions about district processes or decisions that were made. I have shared those questions with district staff so that they will know what your experience is, what support and assistance you need, and what your expectations are. What I will do, though, is acknowledge questions throughout our time together this evening about supporting academics in a remote learning environment. So these tweets from the 26 tweets from quarantine parents, I think they really capture the emotions that we are experiencing, or maybe you've had these actual experiences, I'm not sure. But to hear it from other parents across the nation is kind of fun, and it helps us to put things in perspective. So my 8-year-old daughter just yelled, "Oh no, the toilet is smoking." My wife and I ran to the bathroom to find this. It's just 4 days, just day 4 of homeschool. So hopefully that puts a little smile on your face. So let's talk about the parent's role, managing your remote learning expectations. So what does it mean to teach? Teaching is imparting knowledge or skill, facilitating learning. Think of something that you've taught your child to do, whether it's tying their shoe, brushing their teeth, for those of us that have had teenagers, teaching them how to drive, making a bed, or even teaching them how to write their ABCs. How do you know they learned? What is learning? Learning is the act or process of acquiring knowledge or skill. So in the moment that we're in now, you may not feel prepared for this transition because of the types of things that you're being asked to do in this remote environment. But everybody is experiencing this. So I thought this tweet was fun. Just so everyone is clear, my children are not the least bit impressed at being homeschooled by the Michigan Teacher of the Year. So even those that are teachers are struggling with this, are grappling with the same types of things that you're grappling with. Don't be hard on yourself. I love this word, and I've kind of adopted it during this time. Give yourself grace. You are your child's first teacher, but not your child's primary instructor. So that's really important to remember. You are not alone. So let's talk about what is your role in remote learning. First of all, is to prepare your child to be learning ready. It's to monitor their progress, and it's to partner with your school and teacher. So let's take one at a time. Prepare your child to be learning ready. This means developing a daily schedule and establishing a routine with your child. Not something that you need to do yourself. You really should do it with your child because then they are a part of that process. This is one of those almost benefits of not being in person, because in person they come into the building and the schedule's already kind of set up for them. Here they have some say in the schedule and the routine. And if you can get them involved in that process, they will more than likely buy into it. Remember to include movement breaks. Schedule time for electives such as arts and free choice such as puzzles. Set learning and work behavior goals and targets with your child. Again, do this with them, not to them, but talk through what it is that they have to do. Think about the end in mind and planning backwards and what it's going to take for them to get there. So they may need visual targets. They may need rubrics or checklists for self-assessment. And this doesn't have to be anything really fancy. This can be something as simple as these are the things that I want to accomplish for today. It could be affirmations that they start the day with. Regular review towards those targets and goals. And the frequency will be based on a need. So it'll really be dependent on how often they need to review those targets and goals. You might find that it's content specific. Maybe they love reading, but they hate math. And so you may have to do those, take a look at those goals a little more, or those targets a little more frequently in math. And maybe it's a daily thing, maybe it's an hourly thing, maybe it's a weekly thing. You all work on that together. That's something that the two of you can do, or your family can do together. And then prepare your child for engagement and learning. This one's really, really important. So if they're going online, make sure you're logging in early, because inevitably something will go wrong with the technology. And so making sure that you can get in, that you have the right passwords, that your machine doesn't need to reboot. Early login is really, really helpful. Completed pre-work. So this is important because as preparing to engage in that lesson, it's really important for them to have the foundation or the basis of what that lesson is going to be about. If there's some pre-work that's given to the child ahead of time. So that part is really, really important to complete that pre-work so that they're prepared to engage in learning. And then the other thing that you can support with is a workspace that supports focus. So it may not be that they have an entire room, or they just need a space, a quiet space, a space where they can focus, a space that works for them. Maybe a space separate from a play space so that they know that this is my workspace versus my play space. That space may be your kitchen table. That's fine, as long as it's a space where they can really, really focus on learning. And so to think about some of the questions that were raised in the survey, a parent of a kindergarten and third grader asked, how do I teach my kindergartner school in a remote learning scenario while working full time? Another parent of a 6-month-old, 3-year-old, and kindergartner, how can I support my kindergartner who can't be left alone while juggling a 3-year-old who has an IEP and is also doing distance learning, and a 6-month-old at home? It's nearly impossible. This is how this parent is feeling. So I want to go back to that, giving yourself grace and really being thoughtful about what works, what kind of schedule works for your family, what works for you, what you need. And I'm going to give some additional strategies around that with working with the school as well. And then a parent of a 2nd and 6th grader raised, as you know, many kids react very differently to parents at home than they do their teachers in school. Often they're much more cooperative in the classroom than at home. So what can we do when our child resists work, gets frustrated, and doesn't want to listen, watch, or participate in the lesson or do the assignment? So this is where that setting the learning and work behavior goal and targets becomes really, really important. If you know that your child is struggling, is getting frustrated, it really may be that you need to look at how you've set those work behavior goals. And there may need to be some adjustments and modifications in those, but doing those together, you can continue to point your child back to what the goal is, what the target is, what they're working towards. So that part becomes really, really important. So this was an example of a family that created a schedule together with their child. And it's, again, nothing fancy. You notice that it has what time the child needs to wake up, what time breakfast needs to happen, when academic time will happen. So that's really important to be able to, looking at the schedule, what schedule they need. They even put in here what kind of materials they need, whether they need a notebook or worksheets or whatever it is, or the laptop or whatever they need. They have that all in place. They even have time here for recess. So just identifying when that time is where we just step away and have those movement breaks. And so this was just an example of just a family creating an at-home daily schedule. One of the things that children miss most about school is that routine, is knowing what happens from day to day to day. That part is really, really important. And so whenever it's possible to include that, you certainly want to do that. And it's wonderful if you can do that with your child. Hard to imagine how my kids were ever able to survive regular school days without 23 snacks. So it seems like, when children are at home, they're eating constantly. And so you might even have to schedule in the snack breaks. So we talked about your role, your first role, which is preparing that learning ready child. But the next part is really a heavy lift. It's monitoring your child's progress. So it's really looking at if they're reaching those learning targets to meet the goals. So review and modify those targets. This is what we were talking about a little earlier. Review and modify the targets. Discuss the rate of progress with the teacher. So again, you don't have to do this alone. This is, you become the eyes for the teacher to say, here's what I'm observing, here's what I see. And you work with the teacher in order to make sure that the targets are appropriate, the goals are appropriate, and they're modified as needed. This part's super important. Support your child's love of learning. The last thing you want them to do is to dread school. You don't want them to hate learning. And so talk with them about which learning experiences work best, what do they love to do, and what presents a challenge. And let's talk about, so why is that? Why do they enjoy some things and why do they dread other things? And think about what they share with you, because you may be able to make some modifications in the things that they dread based on what they tell you about the things that they enjoy. So that might be that opportunity. And then discuss these alternatives with the teacher. So remember, I keep looping in the teacher because, again, you're not alone in this experience. So talk to your teacher about, this is what your child is really struggling with. This is what they really seem to do well with. Really, really important that you have that conversation with them. So back to our questions, we had a parent of a 1st and 5th grader that said, what should my expectations be around academic gains for my children this year? And the parent of a 7th grader asked, are they learning enough? At the end of each quarter, is the curriculum covered and really done properly? How can I evaluate my child? And then a parent of a 4th grader asked, these are all kind of similar questions. How do we know if our kids are learning or not learning? How can we ensure that our kids are meeting milestones, especially if we haven't been given the curriculum for their grade? So this is a really good opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the difference between curriculum and standards. So oftentimes standard skills and curriculum are all kind of mixed up together and they're talked about interchangeably. So think about it this way. The standards are the what. That's the grade level expectations. We already know the what. We know what those standards are. So the curriculum becomes the how. It's the tool, the resource that's used to support the what, to support the standards. The skills are the knowledge needed to master those standards. So if you remember as a child, you may have had to memorize mathematical facts, memorize multiplication facts. The actual standard wasn't multiplication, but you use the skill of multiplication in order to be able to meet the standard. So the standard is the what, you already have that. The curriculum is the how. It's the tools, it's the resources, it's the materials that are used. And so that looks very different across districts. It looks different sometimes across schools, depending on what that school has purchased or selected. And so keep in mind that the curriculum piece should always support the standard piece. And that's when we talk about the alignment of standards. So that information, even though you feel like, I don't know, I don't have the curriculum, you're able to get, and I'm sure Ms. Bodner can speak with you all about this at another time, but you're able to always know where students should be by the end of the grading period or by the end of the year. And so that's how you determine, make sure that they're meeting those targets and those milestones. That's how you monitor their progress. Of course, there are assessments that you give, and I'm sure that the schools are providing that information as well. So based on those assessments, that gives you information. It tells you if students are making progress towards meeting that end goal, or if there's some area that they're still struggling with a little bit. And so that is the purpose of assessments, is to provide you with that information. And it gives you a snapshot of just where the child is. So your role and monitoring your child's progress becomes very, very important. And then the third one was your role is partnering with the school and the teacher. Again, I can't emphasize this enough that it's so important that you're not trying to do this alone because you don't have to. Clarify the communication plan. So make sure that you know how you'll be communicating with the teacher, how the school's going to be communicating with you. Know the schedule of updates. Know who to contact, how to reach them, how to navigate through the resources, whether it's a website or learning platform, whatever it is. Make sure you know who to reach out to be able to support you with that. That's not something that you have to do, again, on your own. And then schedule the time with the teacher. I think this is probably one of the most important parts of all of this. Schedule time to talk with the teacher about reviewing the targets and goals. Get their input, get their guidance around that. Find out, if your child is on track with that. Share what you observed. Share what you're seeing. So you know your child really well, and you know what they're responding to, and you know what they seem to be moving through very quickly. And so it may not be appropriate. So share how students are progressing. Share how your child is making progress, or the concerns that you have. Share those early on. And then request feedback on completed work and assignments and ask for help. So children should not be completing assignments and then getting no feedback on it, because them doing the work and not really receiving information back is not going to guide them in the right direction. They may be doing it wrong. They may have a misunderstanding or a misconcept. And so it's really, really important that they're getting feedback. And if you're not receiving that feedback, then speak with the teacher when you schedule that time with him or her to get that feedback, and ask for how to adjust to that and adjust to those differences. So a parent of a pre-K and a first grader asks, if my child is going to a place that will be supporting his virtual learning and offers full day childcare, how can I be aware of what he is learning so I can stay involved? And a similar question from a parent of a third grader: how do I ensure that my child does her assignments without having to monitor her every moment, especially when the teacher is still learning the technology, and often my child is unable to navigate the systems to be where this teacher wants her to be, and then does not tell the teacher that she's lost. So how can I ensure that she does her assignments when she starts the YMCA program and I will not be present at all? How can I find out at the end of the day whether my child has done her assignments? So many questions, and they're the right questions. And so to take a chunk out of that, the first part is, if the child is not telling the teacher that she's lost and she's struggling, this is something that, again, when you have that time to schedule with the teacher, you can talk with the teacher about that to make sure the teacher is aware that she's not asking for help, and maybe find some strategies to support your child. If your child is going to a child care provider during the day, you can use some of these same strategies. So still have that clear communication plan with the YMCA or with wherever they're going. so that you're able to know exactly what's being completed each day. Set that as an expectation that you would like to have that information when you pick up your child, exactly where they are, because your role, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but your role may be really around monitoring their progress. And if you don't have their work product, it'll be a little more challenging to do that. So whether it's the school or the child care provider, work with them around a communication plan on the work that is being done by your child. So when you think about it, your role really hasn't changed. You're preparing for learning ready behaviors, and you were doing that when they were in person. You're monitoring your child's progress. You were also doing that when they were in person. And you're partnering with your school or teacher. And that's really important that you're also doing that even now. So that's critical. And so all of these behaviors, all of this represents work that you've already been doing. The difference is it's happening in a remote environment. So hopefully that allows you to take a breath to say, okay, while the situation is new, the behaviors for me really aren't. I'm still doing the same things. I'm just doing it in a different way. So that's to help you manage your role and your expectations of the remote learning environment. So you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to do way above and beyond just those three things. Starting with those three things will have a huge impact, especially when you're doing it with your partner, the school. So what's the school's role in managing remote learning expectations? So they're first responsible for addressing unfinished learning, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Next, they're responsible for providing access to grade level, high quality instruction to every student. And finally, it's partnering with you. So those are the three areas that are most important in a remote learning environment for a school. So what is unfinished learning? And I really like this phrase. I've adopted it this year. Unfinished learning refers to any prerequisite knowledge or skill that students need for future work that they don't have yet. Doesn't mean that they're not going to get it. They just haven't gotten it yet. I like unfinished learning because it inspires action. When you talk about learning loss, you talk about focusing on student deficit. But when you talk about unfinished learning, what do we need to do to finish, right? And so it becomes work that just has not been done yet. So the school's role is really grade level access for every student. And this is based on the research from TNTP, the Opportunity Myth. And they did some research around, so what do students need to be successful? What do they need to do? What do they need to have in order to have success in school? So they need and deserve consistent access to grade level content. And this comes back through the equity lens that we talk about, that every student need and deserve consistent access to grade level content. And students starting the year below grade level benefit most from on grade level instruction. So you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, we stopped in-person instruction back in March. How can we just jump in in September? We're still remote or hybrid or combination of both. How can we do that? So it's critical, and all of the research has shown us it's critical that we don't go back and try to teach something from March, April, and May that we think that they may not have learned. It's critical that we do figure out exactly where the gaps are, but continue with the grade level instruction, because accelerating grade level instruction is how students will catch up. They will always, if you do remediation, they will always be behind. But identifying what skills they're missing, remember that unfinished learning part, spiraling that into grade level access, that's the role of the school. So they should be looking at what instruction needs to occur for students at the start of the year, and then making sure that they're filling in those gaps through support and spiraling the curriculum. So when students who started the year off behind grade level were given more grade appropriate assignments, the gap between these students and their high achieving peers began to narrow substantially by more than 7 months of learning in a single school year based on better assignments alone. Students will rise to the occasion. They will, if you raise the bar, then they will also raise with you. As long as you are scaffolding, as long as you're providing them with the supports to access that grade level expectation. And so it's really, really important. Again, when we talk about equity, if you want to make sure that students have access to high quality instruction, they have to have access to grade level materials. And so when you think about what the school's role is, this is, again, a heavy lift, but this is what the school's role is to make sure that students are receiving that kind of quality instruction. So a parent of a first and a fifth grader asked, what should my expectations be around academic gains for my children this year? So my response is, in addition to goal setting with the teacher, so set those goals with the teacher around what you expect for your child, maintain expectations of at least at a minimum grade level progress through access to high quality instruction. That is critical. And then the third role of the school is to partner with you. So one of the things, again, to help you manage your expectations of the school, classes will not occur as scheduled in school. So you should not have an 8:15 a.m. to 3:05 p.m. Online instruction, which as I looked through some of your schedule, it didn't look like that was the case. So just because you had so many minutes of in-person instruction, that does not mean that it will necessarily equate to the same number of minutes remote. That doesn't mean that they're getting less. It just, when you think about the structure of a day when you're in person, you have transitions to classes, you have lunch breaks and recess breaks, and there's a variety of things that happen during a school day that extends that school day. There won't be necessarily a minute-to-minute match, especially online. So there's more learning. This is really important. There's more learning than what happens on the screen. So learning will be asynchronous, which means pre-recorded or learning activities that students engage in at their own pace. And they're synchronous, which means the teacher and student are in real time, sort of like what we are right now. If it's asynchronous, students must be prepared to engage, which means they understand the expectations. They are prepared to attend to the task and workspace, allowing for focus, and they have access to the materials. All that means is that they're prepared. Remember about completing the pre-work. They're prepared to complete that pre-work, and they understand the expectations around that pre-work. So if it's asynchronous, it might be pre-work, it might be post-work, it might be work after they have attended an online class. If it's synchronous, then students, again, must be prepared to engage. So they have to have completed that pre-work. They're still in that workspace, allowing for focus. They're logging early, and they're following the virtual rules of participation, such as the cameras on or the hand raise feature, whatever the rules of the classroom, because even though it's online and even though they're sitting at home, there's still rules in the classroom, and they're expected to follow those rules. So the school sets those up, but they do that, again, synchronous and asynchronous. So I want to manage the expectation around not expecting children to sit down at 8:15 in front of a computer and finish the day at 3:05 in front of a computer. That should be broken up, and that should be based on the work that the students are doing and the type of lesson that they're doing. Again, when I looked, and I'll share a little bit later with you, the virtual guide that your district has, it talks about different scenarios of samples of schedules and how there might be a time where the teacher works with the whole group and then they work with a small group, or they send a group off to work individually and then individuals to come back together. And so there are lots of different ways in which that is done, but it's just not continuous online instruction or offline instruction. So there were lots of questions on screen time from this group. A parent of a first grader and a toddler asked how to best support an ADHD type learner with limited screen time, having to work and having a toddler 2.5 at home. A parent of a fourth grader asked, how can schools, teachers, and families limit screen time for their children during remote learning and make sure that at least some of the work children are doing is hands-on with objects and materials in the world and not relying upon computers. A parent of a kindergarten third grader asked, it seems obvious to me that my sons are going to struggle with an extended day as planned for the first 2 weeks. Are you able to give them offline work to do? And also I'm concerned about the amount of screen time and the potential damage to their eyes and posture. And then a parent of a kindergartner, do we think academically and psychologically healthy to leave a 5-year-old in front of a screen for 4 to 5 hours a day? So again, addressing the asynchronous and synchronous, they shouldn't be in front of a kindergartner shouldn't be in front of a computer for 4 to 5 hours a day. And there's nothing in the actual guide, and I'll switch to that next, that I saw that indicated that. And so if that is a concern for you, I go back to the partnering with your school, meeting with your teacher, sharing some of the observations and concerns. All of those things will come into play. If you have not interacted with this, if you've not seen this, this is actually from your district. And I don't know if I can click on it. We'll give it a shot here. And so on your website, there is an opportunity for you to go into the virtual instructional guidebook and schedule for families. And then if you download it, I can do that. I can show you what that looks like. So there's a whole section on synchronous versus asynchronous learning. There's information about the schools, the schedules, the instructional model. It talks a little about assessment schedule. We're talking about assessments a little bit earlier. Some teacher expectations are here. If I jump really quickly to the virtual learning instructional model, again, it talks about synchronous being real time. And then I can scroll down here, asynchronous, self-paced. That asynchronous does not require all participants to be virtually present at the same time. Instruction is self-guided. Student instruction provided on demand and can include pre-recorded video lessons, independent game-based learning tasks, or pre-assigned work assessments. And so for those folks that are really concerned about screen time, it looks as though it's already built into your plan for students not to be in front of the screen the entire time. So when you have an opportunity, take a look at this guide. I think it'll be really helpful for you. It gives you information. Somebody asked about grades. There's information about that. It's a wealth of information here. So I would encourage you to take a look if you have not done so. So when we think about students online, you haven't lived until you've heard a group of first graders shouting, mute yourself, I can't hear you, unmute yourself. And so all of us adults have done it, but it's so much fun to see kids do it as they navigate through this world as well. So the third area that I wanted to talk about was preparing for the remote learning in the new school year. And I know that you've already started your school year, but actually the timing of this might be pretty good because there's some questions that have bubbled up as a result of you having started already. So one of the things that I think is really important to point out is the then versus now. Then being back in the spring when we went into remote learning versus now starting the school year. So back in the spring, it was an unknown health crisis. We were thrust immediately into a state of emergency declaration with widespread stay-at-home orders. There was no time for districts to prepare for remote instruction, including virtual teaching strategies, transition of curricular resources to online platforms, and challenges with connectivity and devices. And quite honestly, there was no time for you to figure all of that out either. Everybody was kind of thrown into this space. So the difference between then and now we have a better understanding of health precautions and review of scientific data to determine reopening guidelines and precautions. Another difference is that in many cases, the stay-at-home restrictions have been lifted. Now, that's a positive, but that's also a negative, because one of the challenges is when everyone was staying at home, there were parents or adults that were at home. Now that the stay-at-home order in many cases have been lifted, parents are back at work and trying to figure out and juggle the childcare part. So that is a challenge, but that is a difference between the spring and the fall. And then there's some lessons learned from the spring about communication, about planning to inform preparation, attention to connectivity and technology needs. Perfect example is that guidebook that we just looked at. I'm probably guessing that you didn't have that virtual guidebook back in the spring when you went into remote learning, but that came out of lessons learned, that came out of doing some problem solving and planning. And so there are some significant differences. So when we think about remote learning, it's hard to not think, oh my gosh, we're going back to that emergency phase that we were in. And hopefully, as you work through this present situation, it's not as much that. Now, of course, there may still be some challenges, but those challenges may be a little bit different than they were back in the spring. So I just thought it was important to highlight that. So some considerations for parents. I would encourage you to check your access of technology, of any training that you might need. I saw on your website that you had training, for example, on Canvas last week, the learning management platform. And so, that might be, if there's additional training you need with that, you might want to reach out to the district around that. And then check access and materials, make sure you have everything that you need. And if you don't, let the school know. Reach out to your partners with your school and your teacher. This is also really important, create balance. We're all trying to do this perfectly, and there is no perfect. And so make sure that you have this work and relaxation balance. It's okay to relax. It's okay to step away. And so it's really important to have that balance. Really important for you to have time for self, as well as balance that with your time with family, because a healthy you helps to support a healthy family. So that piece is really, really important. I would encourage you to remain flexible. The transition between the learning environments is going to happen. There are going to be those times where we're in remote or hybrid or in person, and then we have to shift back until the pandemic is under control. And so just remaining focused or flexible with that will be really, really important. Most importantly, and this picture just just makes me calm. Most importantly, breathe, spend quality time, focus, let your hair down, relax. Really keep in mind that, again, I can't emphasize it enough, there is no perfect. We all as parents do the very best that we can. And I've identified some specific areas where you can really focus as a parent in your role so that you're not thrown into a situation where you're trying to do the role of the primary teacher. You're a partner with the teacher. And so this part is really, really important. So let's chat. There were some questions that I included in the presentation, and I shared those with you, but there were some other questions that I thought I'd really like to focus on a little more, or just share a little more information about. So here's one. A working parent of a first grader asked about my thoughts on evening night education of elementary school age children. As a working parent, I will not be in a position to facilitate remote learning during the workday and will be focused on catching up in the evenings. What are some strategies that help my child keep up with children of wealthier families that have the option of staying at home? So the article that I have attached to this question talks about how all children don't necessarily operate on the school day time. There's lots of research around teenagers. Their internal clock is actually a little bit later. Mid-morning is when they're really at their best. But keeping that in mind, as you set goals with your child, and you know what works best for your child, one piece of this is thinking about when you schedule which items. When you have some flexibility to do scheduling and you kind of nail down the areas that they seem to struggle with, if it works better for your child to do the tough stuff first and then ease into the easier things or the things that they are more comfortable with, great. If it works better for your child to start easy, build up some confidence, and then kind of work their way to the tougher things, perfect. When you're talking about your schedule, again, we're going to go back to giving yourself grace. You have to make sure that your schedule works for your family. And the reality is parents work. And so those parents that are working have to balance that. If you know that you're going to be doing some work with your child in the evening, think about how you set up that schedule. So you might narrow your focus to just making sure your child is learning ready and that you're monitoring their progress. So there may be a way that you set up the expectation that they're doing their work with either their caregiver, or they're doing their work, earlier in the day. And so your role then becomes to check their progress, to monitor their progress, to ask them to explain to you, what they have worked on and what they understand and what they don't understand and what they're still struggling with, because that will give you the information you need to have those conversations with the teacher. So that piece will be really, really important. And then just make sure that you're creating that life balance, that family life balance for yourselves. Again, you're trying to manage a lot of things. And so it's really, really important that you identify the schedule that works best for you. A parent of a 4th and 8th grader said, "What is my view on pods, particularly with regard to access and equity for all learners in a racially and economically diverse community such as Maplewood South Orange?" And so, my initial thought was there are always those families that were paying for private tutors, that were looking for those opportunities to provide for their children to have that kind of leg up. What I would suggest that you do is focus on partnering with your school system to ensure that all children have the best educational experience, that high quality instructional experience, that they have access to great level content. That is where I would really spend my effort. Also, the school's role is to ensure that high quality instruction for every student. So that's where I'd focus. And then think about if there are opportunities for parents to use this community that you have here to collaborate on best practices through Parenting Center so that you're not working in isolation. I mean, a part of this is not working alone and working in coordination with someone else. And so while it may not be that you're setting up a pod, it may be that you're setting up a community, sort of a support group or an opportunity to really think through, all the 3rd grade parents getting together or kindergarten parents, because there were lots of questions around young learners and kind of getting together and thinking about what works best for them and which materials they're using and how they're reaching their child and what they seem to be responsive to. So using your community so that you're not trying to figure this out on your own and working in isolation. Really tough for, I've seen several questions in here of parents that have multiple children or a range of children, or children that are maybe special needs or toddlers or newborns. And so having that additional support, I think, will be really, really critical. The parent of the 8th grader that wondered how can working parents best support their kids' academic progress as they move toward academic years that count for college. So the content from between in-person instruction and remote instruction, the content is the same. So they're doing the same course. That's key, that's important. My suggestion would be to use this time to think about the behaviors, the learning ready behaviors. Think about those as college ready behaviors. So if you're a parent of a high school student and you're thinking about how do I make sure that they have those learning ready behaviors, think about what can we do in this moment to develop those college ready behaviors. So when I went to college, it was a shock to the system, and maybe some of you experienced this, when you were given a syllabus on the first day, and that professor may never mention again that you had an assignment due, but you had the syllabus and you were responsible to make sure that you followed it, you turned in what you were supposed to turn in. You reached out and asked for help when you needed that help. You scheduled time with the professor, and in this case, with the teacher. So developing some of those habits of self-monitoring, self-assessing, that might be a really good way at this point to really think about how to use this time to better prepare those high school students as they're preparing to enter college career workforce. And then the family of a ninth grader asked about how effective is remote learning for children who will be sitting for an extended time for full-day classes. Are there exercises you can recommend to the school personnel for children to do in between classes? So I've talked about the synchronous and asynchronous quite a bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, but there are two really key things. There's an effectiveness of instruction in a remote learning environment. We've talked a little bit about instruction. That greatly impacts the level of engagement of the student. So the expertise of the instructor and the engagement of the student work together to make sure to equal or to yield the effective instructional environment. The one thing that you can support, once again, is that level of engagement of your child, that learning ready child. So that piece is really, really important. The district is working on the professional learning side for the teacher, for the instructor, to make sure that they have the expertise in this learning environment. So when you put those two things together, that has the greatest impact for remote learning. So ensuring that your child is learning ready in this environment is really key. That's really, really critical, and that's how you make this environment more effective. So as I shared a little bit earlier, and Ms. Bodner shared questions about district processes and decisions, those have been submitted directly to the district. And so they will be sharing with you some responses. I think it will certainly inform how they communicate and provide information to you. And so that will be really helpful as well. Hopefully, you know that you have strategies to be successful in supporting your child's learning. Hopefully, if there's nothing else that you saw this evening, that there's some things you've already taught your child how to do some things to be functioning in life. And so when you think about the lessons learned from that and how you went about doing that, you have some strategies. I love this tweet. Our homeschool curriculum includes my lecture series entitled, "Yes, You Still Have to Brush Your Teeth, Even Though We Aren't Going Anywhere." So that is even a part of your daily routine, creating those routines for children. Some resources that I would recommend. I have linked in, again, the Parenting Center information, the virtual instruction guide and schedule book. Our Department of Education here in Delaware, we rolled out some remote learning activities for families. This is not curriculum. These are just activities. Someone asked a little earlier about, are there activities that my child can do? These might be activities that can also be done with your child care provider, as to support learning in school. And so that's available. I put in here the Canvas portal overview, just in case you missed that. That might be helpful for you to take a look at. So these are some resources from your district as well. And so I'm going to end my presentation part by thanking you for all you're doing for your children. Thank you for setting up school at your kitchen tables. Thanks for stepping in to teach and doing your best to help them. Thanks for being patient, understanding, and kind. But most of all, we are grateful for you and we appreciate you partnering with us. And so we have some time now. I'm going to turn it back over to Ann Botner. And we have some time now that we can possibly engage in some conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gant. It was your calmness and reminding us to take breaths is so appreciated. I tell myself that every day, and meditate and be mindful, and we're all in this together, and we're all anxious, and we all want to do a good job, and it's hard. This is hard work from whatever perspective you're coming from. So we just have to remind each other that and grace is the perfect way to put it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to each other, and we're going to figure this out. But so I appreciate that. I also really appreciated your suggestion of working with your community to even if you're not in a pod or whatever, the word pod has been going around in the country really since we went to into virtual learning. And there are people who also choose not to do pods, but what are some of the ways that we can learn from one another? And I really like the idea of talking to one another in your community of what's working for you and what's not working for you, because that's what we do as teachers, right? Like we sit down and we brainstorm and we share our ideas and our strategies for learning. And, so having those conversations with other parents, which I'm sure you do normally, right? Whatever it might be a social situation, or it might be, an academic thing, and you talk to parents. So now it just shifts a little bit, right? It shifts into into virtual, and like what's working for you with homeschooling, because this is a little crazy. It's a little different, right?
It is.
So I do really appreciate that. And I thought that was really, really good advice, because again, we're all in this together, and we need support and help from one another. So there are a few questions. There are a few that are more specific to the district, and at the tail end, I might be able to answer a few of them just quickly. Anything that's really specific to the district, I truly, truly encourage you to reach out to teachers and principals and central office staff. Dr. Taylor gives his weekly updates. So, and a lot of the questions that are in there, I think will start to come out in his weekly updates as we continue to have conversations and get feedback from parents and teachers and principals. Things get tweaked, and that's what these 2 weeks were for. So, that's our plan. So Dr. Taylor is constantly giving us updates, and please listen for them, because they do answer a lot. They will be answering a lot of your questions, I believe. Okay, so question number 1. It's talking about goals and setting our goals and our targets. So how do we know what goals we should set? We aren't teachers. As parents, we can set a schedule, but beyond that, not quite sure what to do.
Sure. So one of the questions that I have, and maybe this is a question that you can answer, is around the assessments. Are there assessments that are given, and then how do you use that data in order to determine what comes next for the child? So I hate to put the question back on you.
No, I
think it would be best to, I don't know what particular assessments you all are using. And so I'd like to turn that back over to you.
Absolutely. So we every year, and throughout the school year, we are constantly assessing our kids, and our students can be assessed just in a typical conversation about a topic that we're talking about. So we're constantly getting feedback from our students and getting assessment information. But more of a formal assessments, we do have our Teachers College reading and writing assessments, and we also have math assessments that we give. We also have our Star Renaissance. We did push them back a little bit, because our first 2 weeks, we really wanted to work on making connections with our students, because we had to build community, and having it in this strange time on camera, it's a little bit harder to make a real community than if you are in person. So that was our main focus for the first 2 weeks. you will be finding that in the next few weeks after that, we will be starting to do some more formal assessments where we get to know our students academically and where they are. We know that, you know, in a normal summer, we might see something called summer slide where kids might fall back just a little bit, and we need to fill in those holes, get them back beefed up again and move them along. And with something like this, where we've been home since March, we're not quite sure yet what we're going to find. So the assessments will be starting in the next few weeks. Once we get those, and actually, if you look in your handbook that Dr. Gant referred to often, the assessment schedule is in there for you to see. And it says at each grade level where the district assessments are. The New Jersey State assessment schedule has not come out. I'm not even sure if we're going to have them this year. Like we didn't have them last year, but our district assessment schedule is in that handbook. And it'll give you a sense of when our teachers will be collecting that information. And then from that information, we teach our students and teach our kids from where they are. We just want them to progress from where they're coming from. So that is you'll see the window. There's usually a few-week window of doing these assessments. So right after that is a good opportunity and a good time to start talking to your teachers. We also do have parent-teacher conferences at the younger grades, which is also a great opportunity to reach out to your teachers.
And so with all of that, and thank you so much for sharing all of that. With all of that, back to respond to the question, so there are two types of goal setting that I'm thinking about. One, of course, is the academic goal setting based on these assessments that Ms. Bodner just shared. But the other really is learning behaviors and target behaviors. So for example, if you see that you need to build stamina with reading, you might say, today our goal is going to be that we read for 2 minutes. Next week, we're going to shoot for 3 minutes. And the following week, we're going to, and our ultimate goal is to be able to sustain reading for 30 minutes, whatever the goal is. So when I'm talking about setting those goals and targets, it is the academic goals, because that way you can monitor progress and make sure that they're reaching those goals. But you can start before these assessments are given. You can start with setting some goals around just target behaviors, whether it's attending to a task, whether it's staying focused in the lesson. So if you see that your child tends to drift during the lesson, it might be something like that. So that might be a way to think about the targets and the goals.
Thank you. Will there be, and I think this is, you can probably answer some of this question more in a general term, but does talk a little bit about our teachers. Will there be an opportunity to share feedback with teachers at certain benchmarks? I'm struggling with the idea of giving space for adjustment to teacher while also observing things that are really not working. An example of this would be the amount of synchronous learning without breaks.
Mm-hmm. So again, and I don't know how you have it set up, I would encourage parents to set at the very beginning, set kind of their plan on how they want to communicate with the teacher. And so almost like you would do in a parent-teacher conference, again, I'm not sure how you all have set it up for the beginning of the year, but I would strongly suggest that you reach out to the teacher to let them know how often you would like to touch base. I agree, you don't want something to go on for long periods of time that's not working. And so I would reach out, identify that time that you're going to touch base, whether it's every 2 weeks or every whatever. I would put that as a part of the agenda.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. Set up a schedule with the teacher and have real conversations. They're ready and willing to have those conversations. Let's see. What is appropriate feedback from a teacher? This past spring, we would get hearts versus real feedback, which is correct at the elementary level.
Hearts, C-A-R-T. Oh, hearts. So feedback gives you, it tells you where students are, and it gives you indication of what needs to happen for them to get to where they're going. And so I always look for feedback to guide. That's the whole purpose. And so I can't speak to the hearts and how that's being used. I mean, it's very possible that heart equals something. You know, it's a symbol for something. I'm not sure if that heart is, yes, you've increased 2 reading levels, you know, and it's communicating something. But feedback really is about growth, and it's about indicating, it's a measure of progress. It tells you exactly where you are and where you're trying to go. And so without that, we can't adjust. We can't make the adjustment. We can't grow. We can't improve. We all need feedback. And so that part is really, really critical.
Thank you. Okay. This question, this person needs more clarification on how a student who is behind should be helped. Very unclear on how parents are to help with children who are behind and the school's responsibility. So I think, what is the best way to go about helping and supporting, and what should a parent do for a child who might be struggling academically? Or maybe socially too. It could be.
Sure. I hate to, I don't mean to go back to repeat something that I've shared, but this is why the parent teacher communication piece is so critical, because when the parent and teacher come together to identify exactly where the child is and where they're trying to get them, you know, by the end of the year, by the end of the month, by the end of the week, whatever those targets or goals are, that piece is critical. And so if they're underperforming, identifying exactly where they're struggling, because oftentimes it might be just one piece that they don't get. It's not that for example, a child that struggles with reading doesn't mean that they cannot read anything. It may be that there's something that they struggle with, a skill that they struggle with, that once they get the support they need with that skill, they take off. And so really diagnosing what the challenges are, and then developing the plan on how you're going to implement that improvement, and then monitoring to see that that's happening, and then coming back together and saying, okay, you know, we don't quite see the growth that we want to see. Let's try this. I equate it to a medical model. I really do, where, you know, if I go to a doctor, I'm having trouble with something, they're going to run tests, and then they're going to treat me with something, whether it's therapy, whether it's medication. They're going to then ask me to come back in so they can do blood tests, make sure everything is doing what it's supposed to do. If it's not, they're going to change my medication, or they're going to do some other treatment or other plan. So when we think about it in that way, we need to do the same thing for children, making sure that we understand exactly where they are, what they need, why they're struggling with what they're struggling with, and then supporting them and making that improvement, and then coming back together to have the conversation about, yes, this worked well, we can now accelerate, or this is still a challenge, and this is why we think it's a challenge.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's exactly what we encourage at the district, to start at your teacher level. And you know, like we've said, that we're starting to gather this data. We're starting to get to know our students and get to know where, you know, there may be some holes that we need to fill in. So giving them time too is quite helpful, you know, in the sense of, you know, saying that you're concerned is 100%. I agree wholeheartedly, but gathering that information and being able to say, okay, this is where I'm seeing maybe a little bit of a problem, and we're going to use this intervention and this intervention and this one, and we're coming back. So thank you, Dr. Gant. That was great advice. Let's see. What if parents don't know the technology and how to work with the child in remote learning?
And so this is another one I might have to bounce back to you, because I don't know what your training plan is, but oftentimes districts will have some training for parents on the technology itself, how to interact with the platform, how to problem solve, and how to get technical assistance when they need it. And so I'm not sure how you all have it set up, but that's, you know, that can be very frustrating for the parent. I get that. And so you might be able to answer that question.
So there are a few things that we've done already and will continue to do. One, we do have a website, an email that you can, if you're having technical issues, or if you have one of our district Chromebooks, you can email info@somsd.k12.nj.us. I did put it in the chat so that you could see it. That's a good way we have people who are working at the virtual help desk, and they are there to just answer questions. It might take a little bit of a turnaround because we do get quite a few emails, but they're working nonstop on this to try to help and support everyone really, students, teachers, and parents. The other thing that we have done is Canvas, we have a lot of professional development for our teachers going on with Canvas since the summer. So it was in August, we started professional development, and then it goes through to the end of this week. So there's been a lot of opportunities, but we've also this week had many opportunities for parents to be trained by Canvas professional developers and trainers. They all have been recorded. So if you could not attend one of those meetings, those sessions have been recorded and are put up on the district website so that you can look at them. Canvas is new to everyone. We're all figuring it out. There's a lot of bells and whistles to it. We're trying to stay very, very basic in the beginning until we start to get really used to it. So I highly, highly encourage you to go back and look at some of those training sessions if you're feeling that you're not quite settled with Canvas. And also talk to, teachers. They also, they can help us along in different areas too. They've been using Google an awful lot and different resources from the internet. And if there are some things that you're not quite sure about, reach out to them too. Okay. Let's see. I've noticed that since March, my second grader has excelled in certain areas, reading, but has become less interested in others, math. Since this remote schooling is not forever, should parents balance this out or just go with kids' interests? They are learning, just not in the way we would have in a normal school context. Is this split something parents should convey to teachers?
So I really am excited that we're acknowledging that students have done some learning during this time. We spend a lot of time talking about what students haven't done or what they didn't get. So it's really exciting when you're able to identify something that children are really excelling in, especially in this environment. So if you remember, back at the beginning of the presentation, I talked a little bit about identifying what works well for children and what they're struggling with and why. And so talking with your child about, the things that work really, really well for them, like they're doing really well in reading. Why is that? What is it about reading that really just captures you? What is it that math that it's just a block for you that you just don't enjoy? And then figuring out, is there something that happens in reading that possibly could be shifted over to math? So for example, when they're reading, are they in their favorite reading spot or they're on a couch or whatever? And is it the location? Something as simple as that, like where I actually have to do math versus where I do reading. Is it that I need to do math first and just like broccoli, I just need to get it done, I love broccoli, but kids not so much. So, or is it that I need to do a little reading, jump into math, then come back to reading and kind of balance it that way? So if there's a way to play with the schedule a little bit to help to balance that some, you can't, the one thing that I don't think we can do is say, okay, you don't have to do any more math, just keep reading. We have to be able to move into the other content areas, but it's really trying to figure out what works really, really well, why they are engaged in one and not the other, and how to use that, capitalize on that, and leverage it to support the area that they're not as comfortable with. And it may be honestly a comfort level where they don't feel as successful because a concept is tough for them. So it may be something like that. And that's an area, again, that you can pair up with your teacher and talk about some strategies to support that.
Thank you. That's great advice. And one thing I might add is when I was teaching, I always noticed that, kids don't have a whole lot of control over things. We tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. It's time for PE, it's time for music. If you can give them choices so that they feel like they have a little bit of control over their own lives, you might feel that everything kind of, the stress level comes down a little bit. So if you have a student who, and Dr. Gant definitely touched on this, if you have a student who really just does not have that connection to math, and it is like pulling teeth to get them to sit down and, go over some math work, maybe, but they love to read, maybe give them the option of which one do you want to do first? Both are going to get done, but giving them just that choice of what they want to do first might just make them feel a little bit better, that they have a control over something. I mean, nobody really wants to do something that might be hard for them. So if math might be a little bit hard for them, or they're not quite strong, not feeling confident in it, maybe they need to just do it and they want to do it first and get it done with, and they feel good about themselves, and all right, and now I'm going to go enjoy my half hour of reading because that's what I love to do. So giving them any kind of choice that gives you the result that you need and your goals being met at the end will go such a long way. I learned that in teaching. It was and even where they go, I didn't, if my kids were reading on the floor, sitting on the floor with their feet up, I didn't care. You're reading, you're doing a beautiful job, keep reading. So just think of those types of things, just to, to get through those tough moments that are definitely going to happen.
The other thing I would add just really quick is
yes,
we also have to kind of be careful in modeling how we feel about that subject.
yes.
I remember as a principal, oftentimes, and even as a teacher, parents would come in and say, well, my child's not good at math because I hate math, or I'm not good at math. And your child hears that and takes that on. And even if they're kind of on the fence about math, they are committed to you. And so if you say you don't like math, I don't like math either. And so we have to be really careful about what we model to make sure that we're not exhibiting some phobia about a particular content area that we may have actually ourselves.
Agreed, 100%. I think someone told me at one point when I was young that I couldn't spell. And it sticks with me all the time. So I keep looking at things over and over and over again, looking for spelling mistakes. And in actuality, I'm okay, but it does stick with you, it absolutely does. Those were the more broad ones, and I thought maybe I could just quickly touch on a few things that might help parents that are a little bit more specific. So you did talk a little bit about standards, state standards, and how, so when parents and teachers look at state standards, they can see where we want our children to be at the end of the school year. And the New Jersey Department of Education website has that. I'm putting it right on now. You'll see on the chat, it's the New Jersey State Learning Standards. If you click on that, you can go by subjects and you can go by grade level. So it says, like, by the end of 5th grade, this is what should be happening in the area of reading and in the area of writing and math. So you can, and sciences, and you can really look at the specifics of where your child should be headed towards, and learning, and all of our curricula and all of our lessons are directly connected to those standards. So The other thing I wanted to say about setting goals is one of the things that our teachers will be doing every Friday is that in the announcement area of Canvas, by 4 o'clock every Friday, you will know what the focus for learning is for the next week. So some of the feedback that I got in the spring, was that it was hard to really support your students or your children when you found out kind of what was going on for the week on Monday morning. So we adjusted and we said by Friday afternoons, we will have the focus for instruction for each class and each subject's posted so that you know what's coming. And that might help with goals also. So you can on Friday or over the weekend, you can have those conversations and say, oh, look, this is what you're going to be working on this week. Let's set some goals together. And I do have to say, we start setting goals in school very young, to the point where even our kindergartners are talking about what is your reading goal. And I mean, it's different at every grade level and developmentally appropriate, but talking about goals is very, very common in our schools, and academic goals. And also, if you're finding that you're having some difficulty with behaviors, setting behavior goals. I used to do that in my classroom all the time. Like, okay, we're struggling with this. This is what we're going to really work on during this lesson. For me as a teacher, it was maybe like raising our hand or, waiting for someone to call on you, whatever it might be. But there might be something at home that you want them to work on for that period of time that you're focusing in on math or language arts. The other thing that came up an awful lot is when is synchronous learning or asynchronous learning coming in. So these first 2 weeks, we did a lot of asynchronous learning because we really wanted to get to know our kids. We wanted to understand where their level of tech expertise, I guess, was, and how we can help and what we need to do. And that required a lot of screen time, and it required a lot of talking to children. I think you will start to see as we get into the more structured classroom lessons, you will see that the asynchronous time will be the mini lesson where we're introducing a new concept, and it'll be short. It will be, maybe 10 minutes tops. And then there's going to be that opportunity for the teacher will say, okay, now I want you to go off and I want you to practice this for a little bit, or I want you to go and read, and I want you to use Post-it notes to write down some notes about what you're reading, and we're going to come back together. So those are times where they are away from the screen. They do not need to necessarily be in front of the screen. They can do it on paper and pencil, and then come back to close the lesson. So there's going to be, or teachers will be taking small groups of students and working in those small groups to work on specific skills. So I do believe that as time goes on and as everybody gets used to small group work and releasing, which is really hard to release and let kids go off and do their own thing because you're afraid they're not going to come back to you. Once all of those things start to kind of weed themselves out, you're going to see a lot more time where kids are not going to need to be put in front of the computer, where they can work off to the side. Maybe they'll hear a bell. Like if we can keep the Chromebooks on, they might hear a bell and they have to just go back to the computer at that time after a certain period of time. So all of this, all of your emails and all of your communication to us, we are listening to you. And I really want you to believe that. We have been talking constantly about how we can make changes and what we can do. And as I said, please make sure you listen to Dr. Taylor's updates, because you will probably see some changes in certain areas. And I think that will, that will be refreshing too. And so we've learned an awful lot from the spring, and we're learning a lot from the first 2 weeks. And I think that really covers the biggest blanket of questions that I heard from the district side. I believe that is it. Thank you so much, Dr. Gant. You were wonderful. I love when I can connect with somebody and I feel good about in the space. So I appreciate your time and appreciate you being with us. And I hope you still have some warm weather down there in Delaware. You can enjoy it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, PTA and Parenting Center. We appreciate it. You very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Gantz. Thank you. And that was wonderful. Good night, everybody.
Good night.